What is up, everybody? I am Kevin Iole. Thank you for joining me. UFC 314 on Saturday. A lot of talk about that show. I think a really good card, especially at the top with Alexander Volkanovski taking on Diego Lopez for the vacant featherweight title. But you know what? I'm here not to talk about the future. I'm here to talk about the past and show how old I really am, right? And joining me right now, I don't want to call him an old guy because he lives right down the street from me, and I don't want him to get
what's up, neighbor?
Yeah, and I don't want him to get mad at me. But Forrest Griffin, the first winner of the Ultimate Fighter, joins me 20 years ago this week. Forrest,
years, man. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. It's pretty cool. You know, I'll be honest. For me, it's like a lot cooler than a high school reunion. You know, I don't get to talk to too many of the guys from the old show back then, but I actually see Lieben a bit, you know, because he's doing
he's judging.
Yeah, he's doing the judging and some reffing, so working with the commission. Good for him. And I think, you know, that's perfect for guys like that to, you know, to kind of to work in that industry, right? Like, if there's one thing I know, it's about fighting and judging, right, and how important scoring can be and how important the referee not missing penalties can be. So I'm happy to have guys like him and Frank Trigg out there.
Frank Trigg's doing it. Yeah, no, that's really good. You know, Forrest, like the UFC was on the verge of collapse at the time that the Ultimate Fighter happened. You know, I reported back then it was a $40 million deficit, and that Lorenzo Fertitta told Dana White to sell the thing. You had been fighting for a couple of years at that point. When they first approached you and said, "Hey, we're going to do this thing, the Ultimate Fighter," what did you say? What was your thought?
So this is the story. I'm going to give it to you. I'll give it to you as quick as possible. You've heard it before. I was a 17-day replacement. I went in, I talked to my lieutenant. I had been, you know, went through, tried to fight. I wasn't, quit my job. Ended up living on my coach's living room floor. Couldn't get a job back in law enforcement again. I was just hustling odd jobs, just trying to make it, you know, basically, you know, just paying bills to go train, teaching kids classes, do whatever I could do, got a job. And then I went in and said, hey, you know, talked to my lieutenant, who was a very nice guy, Lieutenant White. You know, he was like, yeah, you know, the problem is you haven't worked here a year yet. And if you leave, you're not eligible for rehire. And it had been like 11 months and 8 days. And I was a last minute replacement, I think, because somebody failed a marijuana test. And that was the first thing they asked me, is like, can you pass a drug test? Are you on steroids? I was like, no, but thank you for the compliment. So I was like, trust me, I'm not on any drugs. I'm the police right now. So I came out, and then I go to the airport and I say, what have I done? I call my lieutenant. I say, can you pull my resignation letter? Like, can I get reissued my gear? Can I come back to work? I think I made a huge mistake. And then I call, and the producer, I forget his name. I want to say it was Submit. Oh God, he was a super cool guy. But he'd never worked with athletes before. They came from like MTV Real World. They didn't know what the hell they were doing, to be honest, you know, because they didn't understand what an athlete needed.
Right.
And you know, I ended up talking to Dana, but this is 2004, so there's no cell phone reception. So right. Dana White gave the most amazing speech. I didn't hear a word of it, but it was amazing. I got on the plane. I went out to Vegas, took that one more last chance, and it worked out for me.
Yeah, it was when you first started and you're doing the filming and the cameras are everywhere. You know, that was a novel concept back then, even though Mark Burnett had done Survivor and a couple other reality shows at that point. But you know, there
a bunch of stuff, you know.
Yeah. What was that like? So you think you're going to be a fighter, and then you're looking around. And there's cameras everywhere you go, standing out. You know, everything you do. How did you deal with?
Yeah, so that first off, for 2 weeks, if you notice on the first 2 weeks of the show, I'm not heavily whatever, because I was 26 and I'd been a police officer and I wanted to kind of mind my P's and Q's. After 2 weeks, you forget there's even cameras there and you just start being yourself and acting like an idiot. The other thing I tell fighters is if you get an opportunity to do it, because it's like boot camp for the UFC, you're going to fight a lot. You're going to have to make weight a lot in a condensed, very dense period of time, right? You're going to go with your friends to cut weight. You're going to see, you're going to see a lot of fights and just be around and understand how the commission works. And you're going to do on the fly interviews, and you're going to understand like what OTF means. And like, you're going to understand types of interviews. You're going to start, you're going to get practice in front of the camera, kind of like a WE guy, you know, and that really is valuable. You can, you know, start to hone your story and build out what you want to show people as far as your personality. And that's kind of when I was like, what the hell makes me special? I got Chuck Liddell, the Iceman, Mr. Intimidation. I got, you know, Mr. America, Captain America, Randy Couture over here. Like, I am just so far. You got, he's crazy. Bobby, he's the vet. Koscheck's the cocky wrestler. Everybody's got a thing. Diego's the crazy Zen out. You know, Florian's a comedian. I was like, oh my God, I got nothing. And I was like, you know what? I'm pretty average at everything. I will be the everyman type. And I'll be like, you know, but for the grace of God, there go I type deal. And I kind of was like, well, I'm just me. Like, I'm just you. I'm like the kid you grew up with that used to mow your yard, or, you know, it's like your average buddy is like, well, if we just take the average person and put them in a crazy situation, what would they do? And that's what I kind of did.
But, you know, the everyday guy doesn't fight Dan Severn in his first pro fight. And I don't care how old Dan Severn was, right? I mean, you know, you got to be a little crazy to do that.
Yeah, he was younger than I am now when I fought him. No, it wasn't that. It was just you're desperate to fight back then.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think the kids today, they don't understand. Even when I was in the UFC and it wasn't just me, man. You fought hurt. You fought sick. You fought Kevin Randleman pooped his pants in a fight. You know, he had food poisoning going into the fight. He knew it. He was like, what is he going to do? You don't understand. Like, it was like, yo, you're going to make like 10 G's if you win this fight. You're going to make 5 if you fight. If you don't fight, you don't make no money. So if there was a weight discrepancy, you're like, I got to suck it up and go. Or, you know, it was just a different mindset. The other thing is that I never saw it as a path to being a superstar. Like, I thought, all right, I'm going to fight for 5-6 years. I love it. It's going to be fun. And then, you know, I'll go be a police somewhere. And then hopefully I'll retire and defeat, you know, I can use my UFC credentials to get a defensive tactics spot. And I'll teach police officers how to not get their gun taken away, and, you know, how to not.
Imagine how it goes.
Yeah, right. And, you know, unfortunately for me, it worked out pretty well in the fighting thing. I ended up fighting for 8 years. And now I've been employed at the UFC, wait for it, 11 years.
Yeah, that is the amazing thing. You're the vice president of athlete performance at the UFC PI. And I guess, you know, you're probably making more money now than you did for a long time in your UFC career, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I did pretty well pretty quick. I won't, the UFC always had my back, realistically. I was kind of one of their guys. They, you know, you think about, I think I fought Tito, and we were like the co-main event. That was pretty quick. I forget the order, but I fought Jardine. That was a co-main event. So I started making a little money pretty early.
Before we go into the fights, let me ask you about that, because that's an interesting thing. So you film in 2004, then you fight Bonnar, and we're going to get into that in a second, April 9th, 2005. So 20 years ago this week. But here's what amazes me, and I look at some of the fighters, right? You fight April 9th, then you come back, you fight UFC 53, June 4th of 2005, Bill Mahood. Then you fight Elvis Sinisik, October 7th, UFC 55. Then you fight Tito, April 15th, UFC 59. So there in 1 year, you have 4 fights. Then you come back and you fight Stephan Bonnar again in August, and then you fight Jardine. So in a period of 20 months, you fought 6 freaking times after having been on the show and done all that.
And after fighting 2 times in 14 days. Yeah.
Craziness.
No, that was the, you know, if you could get on a card, you did it. Because I was talking with somebody the other day about this, but like, it used to be if you pulled out, you went back to the bottom, and you had to work your way back up. Now there's so many fights, the UFC needs you, and if you can be in shape and have your weight right, which is a lot of what I spend my time telling guys here, is to live like a professional athlete. You know, Duncan, my boss, says 365-day-a-week fight camp. It's something Bo Sandoval here used to say. He's like, man, you're a professional athlete. The money's pretty good. Live like a professional athlete. And if you want to take a fight on 30 days against, you know, basically you keep your weight right, you keep your training up, don't overload yourself, but keep working and stay ready. You can take opportunities and you can really, shoot. You know who did that? Diego Lopez. There's a guy that took opportunities, stayed ready, short notice fights, lost some of those fights, but he showed well, and that's something else I love about the UFC. Diego Lopez lost some of his early fights, but
his first fight in the UFC, he lost.
He didn't turn it. Well, he fought
Mobsar, yeah.
He fought a stud, but he almost popped the guy's knee, and they were like, "Oh, he fought his butt off," and he wasn't punished for it,
Right.
And that's kind of one of the things I like about the UFC. If you go out there, you give a good performance to yourself, and you lose, you look at like Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell, Dan. You look at these guys; their UFC records, they've got like 7-8 losses.
Yeah.
And you know why that is? That's because they were willing to sack up and put it on the line.
And you're fighting the best guys in the world all the time.
Yeah. So it's, that is what I love about the UFC. It as unforgiving a sport as it is, they're forgiving as far as giving you another matchup. It's not like Pride used to be where, all right, you fight this tough guy, we'll let you fight a kid. Pride used to have the all right, you fight a tough guy, you fight a kid. Fight tough,
Yeah, you never got to fight Middleman, right? So you didn't get that. So the fight that everybody talks about is your first fight with Stephan Bonnar. That Dana calls it the fight that saved the UFC. Everybody talks about what a fantastic fight. I think some people forget that night. Ken Shamrock and Rich Franklin, they were quote the main event, right? So that was the big name in Ken Shamrock, who from the early years of UFC, and also at that point he was coming out of the WWE, so he was the world's most dangerous man, big name. And I just remember that fight sitting there going, we're at the Cox Pavilion. I can't wait to see how this young guy, Rich Franklin, can do against Shamrock. And you two walk in there, and that place, like the noise that I remember from the people stomping their feet on the bleachers.
That's actually one of the things I remember most is feeling the vibration of the cage because people were stomping their feet.
It was amazing. So did you, after the fight, did you get a lot of calls, even say the night of, as you're leaving, people going, dude, what the hell was that? Did you hear from a lot of people that maybe you hadn't even heard from for a long time?
Oh, yeah. And it went on because they replayed it on Spike a lot. So, I got all my friends from high school, everybody kind of reaching out. And you got to think, nothing like that ever happened to me before. So I loved it. I was like, oh, my gosh, everybody's thinking about it. All my friends, my family, my aunts I haven't seen in years. Hey, Forrest, that was amazing. Hope you're doing well. It was pretty awesome. Yeah.
What was it like in the fight? Number one, did you expect that gritty of a fight from Stephan? Right? He was a lighthearted guy and everything, but he was tough, like the psycho, right? So what did you expect?
So, all right, you got to think. They had a sparring on the second day. They were doing an intake, and I stepped off the mat, and it was this much space, and I was kind of off balance, and he caught me. I looked back at my foot, what's going on? He caught me with a bam, stiff too, and I was like, oh, okay, we're going. And so then I went at him, and then I was trying to knee him to the body, and I pulled his head into mine, and he got the worst of it. So he got cut second day in sparring, clash of heads, and then people were screaming why we were in headgear, and it was and so there was already backstory that when me and him fought, or when me and him sparred, we basically went to level 9 right off the bat. I was like, okay, this dude's going. All right.
This wasn't learning from each other.
No, we was fighting. I don't know him. He don't know me. We're on the, we don't know what's going on. He had a really powerful cross. He Golden Glove boxing. He caught me with the 1-2, and I was like, all right, I gotta change this game. I can't box with this dude. I gotta get in there and beat him up.
And you were a guy with submissions, and you're a black belt. You never went to the ground. You never thought you just went after him. And that seemed like the perfect fight for the perfect situation, right? Do you think
when he broke my nose, I did actually take him down right then. And I was like, okay, And
I need a break.
them stopping it actually saved me because I was really tired. And then when they stopped it and they had to look at it and they were like, okay, maybe it was 30 seconds, but it was the most important 30 seconds in my life because I was flat. I was just like, I was like, whoa, nope. I did a sprint and I got no energy. And then they stopped it. I was like, okay. I could do another one.
And who was reffing that? Was that Herb Dean was reffing that night?
It was.
Yeah, I thought I remember he was doing it. So after you get done with the fight, before they announced the decision, I'm sure you were, physically drained because that was such an intense fight. And you're standing there. Can you even think, did I win that fight? Like, do you, it was such an emotional moment for you. Could you even think about the result?
Yes, but here's what happened. Me and Stephan both. The last thing they told us was that, hey, if it's close and it goes to if it's like a split decision or anything, we're going to go to a fourth round sudden victory. It's going to be a 3-minute round. How the commission was like, okay, now you're going to fight 3 minutes? What? But we both knew we were both mentally steeling ourselves to go that extra 3 minutes. And that's why when I'm like, hey, he's the one that's like, yeah, we got 3 more minutes. I was like, oh shit, he's right.
Imagine if you would have had done that night. How crazy that would have been.
Yeah, well, I had myself convinced I was ready. Because I felt like, well, I took the second round. I was just too exhausted to do anything, but I felt like I was coming back in the third round. So, I was like, all right, I can do this.
So when you look now, we're 20 years later, 2025, the UFC is worth, depending on who you listen to, 11, 12, $14 billion, expanded all over the world. MMA has overtaken boxing, which in 2005, who would have believed that, right? Who would have believed that? You might have been the only one at that time, right? Even Dana, I'm not sure Dana believed that.
Dana, Lorenzo, I think they kind of knew. So people ask me, it's funny, people ask me, did I ever think it would be where the sport is now, where the UFC is now? And I why is it taking so long to me?
Yeah.
Because it's the best sport there is. It just is, man. And it's always changing. It's different. And yeah, people spend a lot of time on the fence now, but if you kind of understand the chess of it, it's pretty interesting.
And a lot of times people say, oh, they're just standing there holding, clinching. And, I think that probably you have never done that if you think that they're just standing there catching a break.
Yeah, it's funny, though, because if you kind of do relax, all of a sudden you're like, you see somebody whip off 3 or 4 elbows in a row and you're like, oh, yeah, they were relaxing,
They're getting it. So how much impact do you think that season, number one, and that fight, number two, had on the success that was to come?
I mean, it is it is the turning point from a financial standpoint, right? 44 million in the hole. They had to buy. People don't know this still, I guess, but the Fertittas, they bought the airtime. They paid $10 million to be on Spike TV. They didn't have sponsors. They weren't getting paid for it. They bought the airtime to put their show on. And, then after that, well, they got a second season. And then, I think things started to turn and the books started to kind of balance themselves a little more. So.
And now looking at your career, 3 years after that, you become the world champion. But, you did not, some of the fighters, last a long ass time. You were done in 2012. I know your body was kind of breaking down. Do you attribute the tough time that you had finishing your career out health wise to the pace that you kept early in your career when you fought as often as you did?
No, not really. I think it was just, I think maybe in my 30s, I started to, I still expected the same thing out of my body as I did in my 20s.
Right.
I didn't adapt my training to get smarter, and that's like we talk about Volkanovski this weekend. The team over in Shanghai, they help all those guys down at Bang Tao, down at Cindy Kickboxing, like, hey, you guys are the experts in how to kick, punch, grapple, fight, strategy, IQ, but let us at the Performance Institute help you with how to manage your body and manage your training load. And that's such a big piece of it for a sport where you think about, well, it's It's on the ground. It's on the thing. You got to train wrestling. You got to train this. You got to train anti-wrestling. You got to train getting up. You got to train punches into the takedown, striking into, there's so many things, so many skill sets you want to train. And you want to go hard, but like, how do you do it the right way? And then I heard some interviews with Tom Aspinall, and I really like kind of what he's saying just about, again, here's a guy that grew up in the sport and he's learned kind of how to train for a heavyweight body.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I want to ask you this, and just a couple more questions. The sport now, because most of the athletes, they're not coming just from wrestlers into MMA or whatever. A lot of them are training as MMA fighters from the beginning. How good can this get? Like, we always talk about the level of different sports going up over time, and bigger, stronger, faster isn't always in a weight class sport. Doesn't make that big a difference, right? Maybe stronger and quicker do, but, But, just out of curiosity, like, how good do you think it can get as we go in the future? Number one, because of the, starting as MMA fighters as opposed to having to learn it later. And then, number two, also because it's more lucrative and you're probably going to attract better athletes down the road than you did in your day.
The old boxing saying, yeah. A couple things on that. One, you got the Raul Rosas of the world coming up. First time I saw it was, I'll call it the Ronda Rousey effect. The gym I worked out at over my buddy syndicates, all of a sudden I got to like not cuss because there's like 12-year-old girls, there's like 9-year-old boys, there's like kids. And I'm like, what is this? This used to be like just wretched, filthy dudes. Now there's women on the mat. We got a class full of girls. I was like, you guys look like you should be in a competitive cheer class for middle school. You guys are learning how to punch, kick, and grapple. And that was kind of what Ronda Rousey did. And I get the Raul Rosas of the world. And the other thing, you can't underestimate this importance. Social media, right? So the velocity of knowledge has changed. I look for like striking distances. I look for tutorials on YouTube. There's so much good information. You're meeting fighters that have learned how to train from YouTube. And they watch all the fights, and there's just such a knowledge you can get.
I want to just thank you for coming on. Congrats on a Hall of Fame career, my friend.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And I'll see you in the neighborhood.
Be well, my friend. See you soon.
All right. Thank you.